Did you know it costs $12,000 to hand weed 1 acre of lavender versus $600 to treat it with pesticides? Did you know there's twice the demand for lavender in the world than there is that's actually grown? That means that half of the lavender on the market doesn't even come from a plant. Did you know that it takes cypress 24 hours in the distiller to release its 280 constituents? If you distill it for just 20 hours, only 20 constituents are released. You distill it for 26, a little over, 0. And guess what? Most cypress on the market is only distilled for 3.5 hours. If you're like me, when I first started looking into essential oils, I thought as long as I was buying organic, I was getting what was on the label, which in hindsight is kind of funny since I did know that there's a lot of loopholes in organic labeling on foods, but I thought for essential oils, that was the gold standard. I didn't know anything about there being chemicals used in distillation, so it could be grown organically, but distilled with a chemical solvent, and that doesn't have to be put on the label. They could grow it organically and dilute it with other oils, like with extra virgin olive oil debacle. Similar thing. They don't have to label it. They can say 100% pure and not be at all. Totally legal because there's no regulations on the labeling. So how on earth are you supposed to weed your way through all of these marketing and all of the labels and claims that have no basis for truth? How do you tell? There's so many essential oils companies out there these days because they've become so popular. Most of the time what you're seeing on a store shelf especially isn't what you're actually getting. So I'm going to give you 11 questions that you can use to research your essential oils company. They're just a jumping off point. Feel free to add more if you want, but to give you a good idea of some of the loopholes that hide in the processing. And really the only way to find out is to call the company and ask them questions specifically, because there's a lot of fancy marketing and wording on a lot of these companies' websites and even in their marketing materials. So you really have to dive in. I'm going to give you the tools so that you can do that. But before we get started, don't forget to click that subscribe button and hit that bell to get notified every time we launch a new episode each week. Let's dive in. So you're ready to do some research, but what questions can you ask that will help you to navigate through all of this clever verbiage and claims that you can find out there? I'm going to give you 11 questions, and I wish that I could take credit for these questions. I wish I was that brilliant, but I must give credit where credit is due, and these stem from Dr. David Stewart, who we referred to last week in the Healing Oils of the Bible video. You can check that one out right here. Question 1. Does this company own any of their own farms on which they raise herbs for oils? And second part of the question, was that farm previously treated in the recent future with any herbicides, pesticides, fertilizers, etc. that could still be contaminating the soil? So you want to make sure that they have a long period of purity on the land before growing, because they may be using organic practices now, but organic only requires a few years beforehand of being clean, whereas those chemicals can be in the soil for quite some time. So preferably 50 years or more of clean soil is the ideal. Question number 2, does their company have their own laboratory to verify the oil's composition, especially if they are getting them from any other suppliers or additional farms? Are they able to verify them with their own laboratory equipment? Because sadly, there are a lot of suppliers out there that are trying to pass off inferior oils or synthetic oils as pure oils. And if the company that they're selling to doesn't have a really good library of oils or really good testing equipment, then they may accept it on false claims, thinking that it's pure and finding out later that it's not. Number 3, this one fascinated me when I first learned about it, because who knew there were people even that did this? But ask them if they have anybody on their staff who has a trained nose to verify an oil's composition by fragrance. There are less than 200 people in the world that are trained to do this, but think of it like a sommelier when he has wine or she, and swirls it in the glass, and they can smell it and taste it, and just from the aroma they can pinpoint certain things about the wine, where it was grown, what kind of soil it was grown in, all of those things. Those are important with oils as well, because sometimes, the best testing in the world can be fudged a little bit. You really need someone who can smell it. Your nose doesn't lie. Number 4, if their company does use outside suppliers, do the staff visit those suppliers, the farms and the distilleries, on a regular basis to ensure that the claims that they're making as far as growing methods and pesticide-free, chemical-free, fertilizer-free, etc., that those are valid? Or do they just kind of trust them at their word without ever going in and verifying it, or they do a one-time visit? Are they doing regular visits to ensure? Number 5, do they know if the grower has a laboratory on site at the farm to test the crops for peak time of harvesting? Because think of like growing a garden, and you can have a tomato that is grown organically, that is pesticide free, that was in really rich soil, that you pick before it's ripe or even a little after it's ripe, and you're going to get very, very different results from those tomatoes, right? The same exact thing happens with our herbs. So you want to make sure they're grown, or they are harvested at the peak of the harvest. And so not just on a specific date that was scheduled or anything like that, because every growing year is different. And so they have to evaluate the temperatures changing, the precipitation change, all of those things every year. So does the farm have a laboratory in which they can check that? Number 6, do they know if the crops indeed were harvested at the peak time that we just talked about? And if so, how long did they wait before bringing the crops then after harvest to the distillery, to the cookers? Did they sit around for an inordinate amount of time, or what did that time difference look like? Number 7, do they know if their distillery personnel know the art and the science of distillation? Do they know how to pack the cookers properly, the amount of time to leave them in, how full to pack them, the pressure to use? Like we were talking about with cypress at the very beginning, if you distill it too short, you don't get enough constituents, and if you distill it too long, it destroys the constituents. So you need to make sure there's a lot that goes into that distillation process as well, in addition to just the growing and the harvesting of the crop to begin with. Number 8, do they know if their supplier makes a mistake in the harvesting or in the distillation process? Do they go ahead and sell them the oil anyway, or do they destroy it? Is the company willing to wait for the ideal product, or are they more concerned about having the supply on hand that they'll push an inferior product anyway? Number 9, do they know if the cookers in the distilleries have dome-shaped lids or cone-shaped lids? Because most distilleries use a dome shape for the lid of their distillers, but you get the best quality oil out of a cone-shaped lid. So do they know if their distilleries are using one or the other? Number 10, do they know if their suppliers supplement the distillation process using chemicals to extract more of the constituents after the distillation process? Are they using chemical solvents during that time at all? Number 11, do they know if their suppliers bottle the oils directly from the distillery without adding anything additional or taking anything away from them? So are they diluting them at all? Are they adding anything? You want to be sure that what you're getting is 100% pure the plant oil, nothing added, nothing subtracted. I'll be sure to post these 11 questions for you guys down in the video description below, so it's really easy to copy and paste to use as your jumping off point as you start calling around to companies. After doing my own research, I found that no company comes anywhere close to touching Young Living and their Seed to Seal certification, which is why we chose to go with them and why those are the only oils that ever cross the threshold of our home. I'll dive more into their Seed to Seal process and some of the details and the extent that they go to in a future video in just a couple weeks. Next week, we're going to be talking about stewardship and how the Lord cares about our health and what that looks like. How do we steward that well? And what really is health? Because I found a lot of Americans especially are using the word healthy, really just meaning no pre-existing conditions. And health is so much more and so much bigger than that. So be sure to join us next week as we chat about stewardship. If you have any questions about today's video, feel free to pop them in the comments below, or as always, feel free to reach out via any of my social channels. I look forward to chatting with you guys next week. Cheers.